Hello and welcome to Unacademy, a one-stop destination for the English medium civil services aspirants. A very good morning and welcome to the daily Hindu news analysis. So let's begin today's discussion by first looking at the topics that we are going to discuss. From the Delhi edition of the Hindu, I have chosen 6 important articles for a detailed analysis. Just stay with me for the next 1 hour. I promise to cover all these articles as comprehensively as possible so that you don't have to go back and read the newspaper again. The whole intention is to ensure that these sessions become a one-stop solution for all your current affairs problems. If you guys are liking our initiatives, do support us with your likes, your comments, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Now, before we begin the discussion, today I have a very, very important announcement. This is the last week as we progress towards the prelims examination. You have 1 more week left, and I'm pretty sure many students would be struggling with a need for motivation with regard to strategy, and they would be craving for some tips with regard to the upcoming prelims exam. So by now your preparation is done, your revisions are done, you would have practiced enough tests as well. But what should you do during the last 1 week? What strategies do you need to employ as you approach the exam with just a few days left? I'm sure this is a question that must be bothering all the aspirants who are attempting the 2024 prelims. And also one more important question the students will face is what to do after prelims. Should I start preparing for mains or should I wait for the results? Or what should be the strategy post prelims? So if you have these questions, we are here to help you. We are launching Unacademy Inspire, where we are bringing UPSC toppers on our platform. Starting today, we will be conducting special sessions through the toppers of previous years, and there would be special classes on the Unacademy app as well. So today on our UPSC Unstoppables YouTube channel at 8 p.m., 3 toppers will be coming together to provide you certain important tips and strategies and what you need to do during the last week of your preparation, and also more importantly what you shouldn't do during the last few days. So do attend this session live on the UPSC Unstoppables channel by Unacademy at 8 p.m. There would be many more sessions on the Unacademy app as well, where former toppers and as well as civil servants who are already in the civil services will be addressing you, conducting these sessions on YouTube and as well as on the Unacademy app. Next, as part of the last lap, where we are helping you revise some of the important topics, today Sham sir will be taking up a session on all the important ratios and graphs at 7 p.m. right here on our YouTube channel. So do attend the session live. With this, let's get started with today's discussion by looking at this important column by Suhasini Haider on page number 8 of the Delhi edition. This article focuses on India-US relationship. The writer is talking about some of the challenges that are being faced in the India-US relations, and the writer is calling for a reset of India-US relations. So let's understand this topic in complete detail, as it can be very important for GS paper 2 under IR. See, India-US relations, they're often described as the most defining partnership of the 21st century. As the world's largest democracy, that is India, and one of the world's oldest and most stable democracy, that is the United States, it's only natural for India-US to come together and align together as they have a lot of common interests. So over the last 2.5 decades, India-US relationship has grown to the next level. We have very good strategic relations with the United States, spanning across several domains. But however, if you look at the past, if you look at the present, and also if you examine the prospects for the future, there are many challenges that we have faced together, sometimes against each other as well. In the past, India-US have shared a very complicated relationship. In the present as well, even though we are great friends, great partners, there are many challenges, many issues that are plaguing the relationship. And in the future as well, we can foresee similar challenges and opportunities. So the writer is talking about the crest and trough in the relationship, the ups and downs that India-US have seen in the past, in the present, and what we might see in the future as well. Hence, the writer is urging India-US to reset the relationship, to address some of the pressing problems, to resolve some of the most important challenges in the relationship, so that this important partnership, the most defining partnership of the 21st century, could be set on the right track. So to understand this argument further, you need to know the background to India-US relations in brief. You should also know how the relations have really developed in the last 2 decades and where the relationship is headed. Because if there is a question, let's say UPSC might give you a question asking you to examine the entire spectrum of India-US relations. Later, after I cover this article, I will give you a practice question and I'll try to help you build a model answer as well. So first, let's look at a brief background to India-US relations. Let's go back into the past and take a quick look at India-US relationship. In 1998, when India tested nuclear weapons at Pokhran, the Pokhran second test, this triggered a major outlash against India, and the United States in particular was heavily critical of India's nuclear tests. The US would even impose economic and technological sanctions on India, and in the past, US had even tried to derail India's nuclear program and even our space program. So prior to 1990s or even prior to early 2000, India-US shared a very complicated relationship. So after the nuclear tests in September 1998, then Prime Minister Atal Bihari Vajpayee visited United States and he addressed a gathering at the Asia Society. During this address, Prime Minister Vajpayee stated that India-US are natural allies of each other. Now, this was a very historic statement. See, if you look at post-independence, let's say post-1947, from 1947 till 1971, I would categorize this as the first phase of India-US relations. Because post-independence, India was receiving a lot of assistance and support from the United States. India was struggling economically. We barely had any industrialization. We were struggling with food security, with agriculture, and many other sectors. So the US would start assisting India. It would provide support in our nuclear research as well in the civilian domain. It would assist India in the field of manufacturing and industrialization. And eventually, when India faced a grave food crisis in the 1960s, the US delivered food aid to India and started assisting India in every possible sector. Even in the defense domain, the US would support India in some matters, especially with regard to the concerns associated with China. India-US both had mutual concerns about China's nuclear program, and India-US even collaborated during the 1962 war between India-China. The US did give some kind of support to India, and India-US even collaborated through a covert operation to focus on China's nuclear program as well. So that was the nature of relationship between India and US in the initial years. Because don't forget, by then the Cold War rivalries had begun. Global geopolitical order had been divided into 2 power blocks, one led by the Western democracies under the leadership of the United States, and the other led by the communist bloc under the leadership of the Soviet Union. So this Cold War divide was indeed putting pressure on India, and the US was expecting India to align with Western democracies. But India was very clear, because under Pandit Nehru, India had adopted the principle of strategic autonomy, meaning India would follow independent foreign policy. India clearly stated that we are not allies of anyone. We don't ally with any country. And India even gave leadership to the non-aligned movement. Pandit Nehru firmly believed in the principles of non-alignment and gave the world a third ideology when the world was divided between the capitalist democracies and the socialist communist powers. So India, along with the other non-aligned members, they carved a middle path, right? They created a third world and stayed away from these geopolitical rivalries. So US was not very happy with India's position. It could never understand why a democracy like India was not siding with Western democracies. So some friction was obviously there, ideological differences were there, but still there was some cooperation, some assistance. The US was helping India in all these areas. But by late 1960s, early 1970s, problems began to emerge. By 1970-71, major issues and differences came up, and India-US relationship would even turn hostile. The US would turn hostile against India for the next 3 decades. This all started primarily in East Pakistan, where Pakistan was committing brutal atrocities against the Bengali population. So as India decided to intervene and eventually played a critical role in the liberation of Bangladesh, the United States completely turned hostile against India, and it even threatened India with consequences during the 1971 war. Because for the United States, Pakistan had become a critical ally. By late 1960s, Pakistan was helping then US President Richard Nixon to build a relationship with China, to reopen ties between US and China. Pakistan had become a reliable partner. Pakistan had aligned with Western democracies. It had even joined military clubs led by the Western countries. So Pakistan had become this trusted partner of the US. So when India supported the liberation of Bangladesh and played a decisive role in East Pakistan, the US turned against India and even threatened India with military consequences. Plus, the US started targeting India's nuclear and space program. By 1974, under Prime Minister Indira Gandhi, India had carried out the first Pokhran test, the nuclear test. India had received civilian nuclear technology from Canada and US. We had used the same nuclear material and reactors to power our weapons program. So this was seen as a violation of international law. India had by then boycotted the Non-Proliferation Treaty as well. So the US would become openly hostile against India. It would start targeting India's nuclear and space program. So throughout 70s, 80s and 90s, for those 3 decades, we had a very difficult relationship. And eventually in 98, when India tested its nuclear weapons again, the US retaliated against India. It was not just critical of the nuclear tests, but it even imposed sanctions against India. So how come this relationship, which was so complicated, how did this transform in the early 2000s? So that's why I quoted Atal Bihari Vajpayee. Just few months after the nuclear tests, Vajpayee delivered this historic address at the Asia Society while visiting the US, and he labeled India, US as natural allies of each other. Now, if you understand the approach of India, previously we never saw any country as an ally, right? Even today, we don't align with any particular country. We follow our own interests. We are prioritizing our national interests. Whichever country can suit our interests, protect our interests, will align with them. So when PM Vajpayee stated that India, US are natural allies, it basically meant that we have a common objective, we have common priorities, we have mutual interests. We might have a lot of differences on certain issues and subjects, but there are many other issues, global challenges, where India, US are actually on the same page. So this would start transforming the relationship from early 2000 onwards. In fact, from 2001 till now, I would label this as the third phase of India-US relations. If 1947 to 71 was the first phase, where we had ideological differences but cooperation and assistance with each other, then we had the second phase between 1971 and 2001, which was of open hostility and tensions with each other. The third phase was marked by the development of strategic relations between India-US. The two would become the closest of partners between 2001 till date. In fact, the 9/11 attacks was a turning point. What happened in Afghanistan was a turning point. The US would need India's support in counterterrorism. So initially in 2001, counterterrorism was the area where India-US started getting closer. As US invaded Afghanistan following the 9/11 attacks, it needed India's support to counter the terrorist groups, as the US could no longer rely on Pakistan. The US knew very well Pakistan was playing a double game. So this relationship, which was now being built on the foundation of security and intelligence cooperation, it further matured into a much stronger defense relationship. And then during the Manmohan Singh era, the relationship was completely transformed with the signing of the historic nuclear deal. In 2005, the India-US nuclear deal completely transformed the relationship, and the US not only recognized India's nuclear program, but it struck a deal with India and even supported India to join export control regimes. It lifted all the economic and technological sanctions. So this was a complete transformation, because now US saw India as a great opportunity, economic opportunity, a strategic opportunity. The US needed a major counter force in Asia to counterbalance China. The US saw the massive economic prospects in the huge Indian market, which had been opened up. By 91, we had introduced economic reforms, and India was one of the fastest growing economies. So US saw India as an investment destination. US realized that American companies could find a huge market in India, right? And it would be mutually beneficial. Of course, India would also equally benefit. And more importantly, India would be a counterbalance to China and assist US in counterterrorism. So this is what transformed the relationship, and today we are in a sweet spot as far as India-US relations are concerned. In fact, the last 20 years have been the best possible years for India-US relations. So in this context, it's important to understand what the writer here is trying to project. In fact, this article is published to mark the 1-year anniversary of the visit of Prime Minister Modi to the US last year in the same month of June. PM Modi visited the United States and several key agreements were signed. For example, India-US have signed a deal for jet engines. American aerospace manufacturers such as the General Electric will be supplying the most advanced GE fighter jet engines to India, along with transfer of technology. So India is not merely buying these products, but there is transfer of technology involved, which will support indigenous production. Along with that, India-US have established an initiative called ICET, the Initiative on Critical and Emerging Technologies. So under this, India-US are collaborating in the fields of artificial intelligence, robotics, and all the other critical emerging technologies which have defense applications and also civilian applications. So this marks the complete transformation of India-US relations, right? And essentially we are in this third phase of the relationship. So even though there are a lot of positives in India-US relations, there are many drawbacks, there are many challenges, there are many things which are holding India-US back. So that is exactly what we need to examine. Now we understood the crest, the highs of the relationship. Today we have a very solid defense and military relationship. For example, if you look at India-US defense relations, we have signed all the 4 foundational defense agreements expected by the US. The United States has an expectation from its close military partners that they have to sign 4 foundational agreements. I have given the list of the 4 foundational agreements as well, because there can be a prelims question based on this. We signed the General Security of Military Information Agreement in early 2000 itself under Prime Minister Vajpayee. This provides for exchange of military information and military intelligence. In 2016, under the Modi government, we signed the LEMOA, Logistics Exchange Memorandum of Agreement. This allows Indian and American forces to make use of each other's military bases for logistical support, for refueling, resupplies, etc. So this essentially increases the operational range of Indian forces and the American forces. So US armed forces can use Indian military facilities, Indian armed forces can make use of American military facilities. Next, in 2018, the COMCASA was signed, Communication Compatibility and Security Agreement. This agreement would allow US to sell advanced communication equipment, which provides for encrypted communication on the aircrafts and other defense platforms it is selling to India. We conduct so many military exercises, from Malabar exercise, which is a multilateral exercise, to bilateral exercises like Yuddh Abhyas and many others. So our armed forces have built great interoperability. The navies of India and US work very closely with each other across the Indian Ocean, right? They're jointly involved in maritime operations, in tackling piracy and other non-state threats, and also in providing disaster management assistance. We have procured advanced military hardware from the US, such as the C-17 Globemaster and the C-130J Super Hercules transport aircrafts, which provide heavy lift capability for the Indian Air Force. We have also procured the P-8I Poseidon, which has advanced maritime surveillance capabilities and anti-submarine warfare capabilities. We have procured the M777 howitzers to ramp up our artillery guns. We have also procured assault rifles, the 6-or assault rifles from the US. We have procured the Harpoon missiles. We are now looking at procuring advanced drones like the MQ-9B, the Predator series of drones, the Sea Guardian and the Sky Guardian drones under the MQ-9B Predator Reaper series. They are being procured for the Indian Armed Forces. So such an advanced defense relationship has been built between the two sides, and on several issues we are on the same page. For example, if you look at the issue of counterterrorism, the US has been assisting India. India has been helping the US in return. If you look at the American position on Pakistan, the US has de-hyphenated India-Pakistan relationship. Previously, let's say in 1990s, US would see India-Pakistan on the same page. It would link any issue, especially the Kashmir issue, and see Pakistan as an equal partner, and it would put Pakistan on an equal footing with India. But in the last 2 decades, US has de-hyphenated its ties between India and Pakistan, and it deals with Pakistan separately, deals with India separately. It does not pass comments on the Kashmir issue. It doesn't try to meddle with India's interests as far as the Kashmir issue is concerned. The only problem possibly that we have is that the US continues to supply defense hardware to Pakistan. For example, the F-16 fighter jets and its upgrade has caused problems for India, but other than that, the US has been largely supportive of India's position against Pakistan. Right? Even when India targeted Pakistan through surgical strikes and airstrikes after terror attacks, the US was largely supportive of India, at least publicly. When it comes to the Indo-Pacific approach of India-US, we are on the same page. We both see China as a threat. We are affected and concerned by Chinese aggression. And we are also part of groupings like the Quad or the Quadrilateral that brings India and US together with Australia and Japan, which are other like-minded democracies in the Indo-Pacific. So there are many things which are working for this relationship. There are many positive aspects, and these are the highs of the relationship. But at the same time, there are few challenges, there are few lows in the relationship. For example, the Russia-Ukraine war has created a very big divide between India and US. We are on the opposite end of this conflict. The United States has directly targeted Russia with imposition of economic sanctions, by bringing international diplomatic pressure on Russia, and also by trying to drag Russia to the UN and various other organizations where Russia is accused of committing a violation of international law. Whereas India's position is diametrically opposite to this. India has focused on its traditional relationship with Russia. Right? Russia has always been this all-weather friend from 1947 till date. And there is no way India could abandon Russia, and India has directly or indirectly stood with Russia during the conflict. We abstained from all the votes against Russia pushed by the US. India has never voted against Russia in any of these resolutions that were brought up at the UN General Assembly, UN Security Council, UN Human Rights Council. We have abstained from all these votes. And more importantly, we have bypassed the Western sanctions, and India has become one of the largest buyers of Russian oil. Initially, US had a problem with this. It tried to raise this issue with India, but now it has let it go. It has not threatened India with sanctions, secondary sanctions. But of course, the US is not happy with India's position, and India is also not happy that US keeps pushing India to alter its position on Russia, which India can't do. Right? Russia is a time-tested friend, a friend which has always stood with India, and there is no way India can abandon Russia. Right? We are basically looking after our own interests by standing with Russia. It doesn't mean we agree with Russia's invasion of Ukraine. India has actually called for an end to the war. But India wouldn't risk affecting its ties with Russia because it's an external problem at the end of the day. Right? So for India, it's more critical to protect the traditional ties we have with Russia, and the US, in a way, has started to see that why India has to maintain that relationship with Russia. But it remains a point of friction. The US is always not on the same page as that of India when it comes to the Russia-Ukraine war. Similarly, if you look at the Gaza war, the US has stood with Israel, supplying arms and weapons, providing financial support, providing diplomatic support to Israel. But India doesn't entirely agree with this position of the US. India has a more balanced position on the Israel-Palestine issue, and India has been openly critical of Israel's use of disproportionate force. We have highlighted the large-scale civilian deaths which are occurring in Gaza, and right now Israel is under investigation by the ICC. It has been accused of a genocide at International Court of Justice. So India is critical of Israel's approach, the disproportionate use of force, but the US continues to back Israel, and this again is a point of difference between India and US. So there are such points of division that exist, and these are the challenges that the writer is trying to highlight. Even if you look at China and its aggression across Indian Ocean and the South China Sea, India-US have same concerns. We have a mutual interest in countering China here, but the position of India-US, the approach of India-US is entirely different. If you look at China's threats against Taiwan or Philippines, the US is very aggressive. The US has directly provided defense support to both Taiwan and Philippines, and in a way it has aggravated the tensions with China. But India doesn't believe in open confrontation. Even though India opposes the Chinese aggression, we don't believe in such open confrontation, because at the end of the day, India shares a border, a disputed border with China. Even at the Quad, for example, the US has been pushing India to be more aggressive, to provide Quad a military angle, which India has refused. Because India doesn't want to get into a direct confrontation, we just want to maintain the diplomatic pressure on China and oppose Chinese aggression. So, even though we have common interests, the approach of India-US is different, and the aggressive military-based approach of the US to counter China creates problems for India. So this again becomes a point of difference, even though it's a mutual interest to counter China. The US has pushed with expansion of the Quad. I don't know if you guys have heard about this. This is a recent development. Senior US officials in the National Security Council, in the State Department, they are negotiating with other countries in the Indo-Pacific to expand the Quad grouping, called the Quad Plus. So along with the existing 4 countries in the Quad, they want to bring in other countries like South Korea, Philippines and others who have major issues and disputes with China. So any such expansion of the Quad could be seen as a containment strategy by China, and it could push China to become even more aggressive. And eventually the impact will be felt by countries like India, which share borders with China. So these are the major differences that we have. And if you also observe, there has been no Indian ambassador appointed in Washington for several months. The US ambassador in India has triggered a controversy as well by making comments about India's internal issues, such as Manipur. The State Department has made very adverse comments on India's human rights situation, the way minorities are treated in the country. The State Department's Religious Freedom Report has caused outrage in India. India has criticized the US for interfering in India's internal issues. Right? But the US believes that in India, religious freedom has been threatened. Religious freedom has been curbed. Minorities are under greater threat. But India dismisses these claims, and India is asking US to look inwards, because even in the US, there are many social challenges which cause concern for India. Be it the racial bias that exists in the US, the rise of far right-wing extremism in the US, all these are matters of concern for India as well, right? So India doesn't like any such internal interference or meddling by the US. So these reports by the State Department that human rights are under threat, religious rights are under threat, minorities are under threat, this creates a problem for India naturally, and it has led to friction between the two sides. But the biggest controversy in the relationship that has broken out has to be the allegations of an Indian assassination plot on American soil. We have seen the recent revival of the Khalistan movement, particularly amongst a few Khalistani extremists in the diaspora in US, Canada and other European countries. So of late, some of the Khalistani extremists have been shot dead. For example, Hardeep Singh Nijjar, a wanted terrorist. India had proscribed him as a terrorist under UAPA. So he was shot dead in Canada by a couple of armed men. A similar plot apparently was unraveled by American authorities, where there was an assassination plot to take out Gurpantwan Singh Pannu, the founder of Sikhs for Justice, which has been proscribed by India as a terrorist organization. So the US alleged the involvement of Indian authorities. The US alleged possible government involvement, which basically was a reference to the involvement of India's external intelligence agency, research and analysis wing. So US, Canada together, they are part of Five Eyes intelligence initiative with UK, Australia and New Zealand. So US and Canada alleged that they had credible information and intelligence to show that Indian agents and Indian officials were involved in ordering these assassinations on Canadian soil and on American soil. So obviously, no country would like foreign governments to be conducting such extrajudicial operations or illegal operations on their soil, that to assassination of their citizens. Because Gurupantwan Singh Pannu has a dual citizenship, is an American citizen as well. So the US has taken up the case very seriously. It is currently prosecuting this particular case, and an Indian national who is allegedly a criminal has been arrested by Czech Republic, where he was traveling, and US worked with the Czech authorities to get this criminal arrested who was possibly involved in this assassination plot. The US has even revealed the details of Indian intelligence officers who were allegedly involved in the plot. India has strongly denied all these allegations. India has denied any such involvement, because officially India's position is that we don't have a policy of assassination. We don't engage in such covert operations. So irrespective of what India claims, there appears to be some evidence or proof with the US, right? Otherwise, US wouldn't have taken such a big risk in harming its ties with a close partner like India. So unless and until India addresses these issues, right? India has promised an honest investigation. India has promised cooperation with the US as well. But with Canada, we have reacted very aggressively. We have downgraded the relations with Canada as well. So this issue has become a major point of friction, which has really dragged the relationship down. Obviously, American authorities will not settle without taking this case to the logical end. They would like to see the perpetrators to be punished. They would like to see their rule of law to be strictly enforced. Now the question is whether India will cooperate. How will India correct the damage, irrespective of whether we were involved or not, right? So let's not get into speculation whether we were involved or not. Officially, our position is that India was not. India has not been involved in such assassinations. But the US is accusing India, and India has to come clean. India has to cooperate. India has to correct that image as well. So the other challenge that we are going to face is the impact of the recent elections. Right now, we have a coalition government. There would be regional partners, the coalition partners who would be pulling the center in different directions. Plus, the US is also headed towards elections, by the way. So in the run-up to the elections, the Biden government would be a lame duck government. It would be hesitant to take any bold decisions. And most opinion polls are indicating a possible return of Donald Trump, which might create many possible challenges for India. Because during the previous Trump presidency, India-US relations improved in some areas, but in many other areas, Trump's erratic behavior created problems for India. So there are many roadblocks in the future as well. How we are going to deal with China, how we will handle the bilateral issues that have propped up. We have some trade-related issues as well, right? So these issues remain a challenge for both the countries and the entire relationship. That is why the writer is calling upon India-US to reset the relationship, to honestly address the problems and clear out the issues that they have, because this indeed is the defining partnership of the 21st century. Is that clear? It's one of the most significant diplomatic relations, and you can expect direct questions on this topic. So let's look at a practice question quickly. India's ties with the USA. India's ties with the USA has a complex past, present and future. Examine. Right? It's a very broad question that has been asked. So what you can do is, in the introduction, you can set the tone of your answer, the position that you are going to take on the statement. So you can state that India-US relationship is called the most defining partnership of the 21st century. So that way you are highlighting the importance of this relationship, not just for the two countries, but for the entire world. These two countries can define the geopolitics of the world in the coming decades. So please set the tone right at the very beginning. You are clearly establishing that this is the most important diplomatic relationship of this century. But also mention that there is a complex history in the relationship. There are challenges, there are some issues that we are facing even in the present. and in the future as well, most likely, there would be certain problems and challenges. Some of them will carry forward from the present to the future as well. So mention that, and this will basically set the context. Then in the body, talk about the three distinct phases of India-US relations, which I mentioned. A brief paragraph on 1947 to 71, maybe just 2 to 3 lines, explaining the ideological differences, but still assistance being provided by US to India, right? And the small cooperation that we had in some sectors. You can briefly mention that in a couple of lines. Next, the period of hostility from 1971 to 2001, right? The 1971 war, the nuclear program, etc., and the nuclear test eventually, and the transformation seen from 2001 to 2024. So here you can be a little more elaborate. You can talk about defense, security, counterterrorism cooperation, the nuclear deal, the ICET initiative, our collaboration in the field of research and development, climate change, education and healthcare, right? So whatever initiatives you are aware of, please mention that. You can say that we have signed all the 4 foundational agreements. We are procuring military hardware from the US. There is transfer of technology involved. So mention all these aspects that I discussed here, so you can pay more attention to the present relationship. For the past, only a brief outline is sufficient. Maybe in one small paragraph you can talk about the 2 phases of the past, but focus more on the present. And then discuss the challenges. Mention the challenges. Russia-Ukraine conflict, the Gaza war, Chinese aggression, how we are dealing with it, US relations with Pakistan, right? Then you can also discuss the allegations of assassination attempts by India. Then talk about the other issues, trade related issues, and some of the other bilateral issues that we have. So mention these challenges and point out in the conclusion that there is a need for a reset. So remain consistent with your initial opening statement that this is the defining partnership of the 21st century, right? In the conclusion as well, maintain the same stance, but just ensure that you point out these challenges are present. It might derail the relations, so it's better we address them, and that requires a reset. It requires both India, US to take a step back and arrive at a mutual point where we can let go of these issues and move forward in the relationship. So that requires a reset in the relationship, and that would be your conclusion. So that way you have a proper logical flow of thought. There is a good structure to the answer. You've covered all the key points in the right order, right? So this is how you build a good answer, and we are trying to include such answer discussion regularly through the Hindu analysis so that it can help you improve your answer writing skills. Now, let's take a quick look at the remaining articles. The other articles are relatively smaller, and we can quickly go through them. So the second topic for discussion would be this article on page number 8, which is very important for GS2 and as well as GS3. This article is referring to an advisory opinion that was recently delivered by the International Tribunal on the Law of the Sea, ITLOS. So let's understand this topic in slight detail. I'm sure many of you would have heard about the UN clause, the UN Convention on Law of the Sea. What is UN clause? It is a UN convention brought out in 1982 that governs the maritime domain. It defines maritime boundaries such as territorial waters, contiguous zone, exclusive economic zone. It establishes national jurisdiction. It also defines how maritime disputes can be settled. It also talks about the maritime environment and how the marine environment can be conserved and protected from the impact of pollution, climate change, global warming, etc. So the UN member states and those who are party to the UN clause, they have certain obligations on them. First, they have to respect the maritime zones or the maritime boundaries that are established. They have to respect each other's national jurisdiction as far as the seas and the oceans are concerned. And if there are any disputes, any maritime disputes, they have to make use of the dispute resolution platforms that are provided under UN clause. Under the UN clause, there are different platforms available for dispute resolution. For example, you can take the case to International Court of Justice, which is the judicial organ of the UN. You can take the case for arbitration at PCA, Permanent Court of Arbitration. So through the process of arbitration, instead of adopting the litigation route, through arbitration you can try and resolve the maritime dispute through the award that is delivered by PCA. So both these judicial bodies are headquartered at The Hague in Netherlands. Next, there is another platform established by the UN clause itself. See, ICJ was not created by UN clause. ICJ was set up through the UN Charter. It's a primary organ of the UN. PCA also, it predates the adoption of UN clause. So UN clause established a dedicated judicial platform called ITLOS, the International Tribunal on the Law of the Sea, to interpret and enforce the UN clause. Is that clear? So ITLOS is a tribunal, a quasi-judicial body, and its primary role is to interpret the UN clause, to enforce the UN clause. So if two member states have a maritime dispute, or if, let's say, there has been an instance of pollution caused by a certain incident, so the states can be held accountable through ITLOS. Or as far as marine environment, marine protection is concerned, under the UN clause provisions, the states can be obligated through ITLOS rulings and judgments, and it provides for the interpretation and enforcement of UN clause provisions. So that is the role of ITLOS. It was established by the UN Convention on Law of the Sea in 1982. Now, I'll give you one small assignment. Can you find out where ITLOS is based out of? Where is it headquartered? Which city, which country? Please mention that in the comments below. Now, why is ITLOS in the news? Why is the article referring to it? Recently, a group of small island countries which are affected by global warming, rising sea levels and climate change, they approached ITLOS asking for advisory opinion with regard to enforcement of UN clause provisions against climate change. Is that clear? Let me repeat this. There is a small group that brings few small island states together. It's called the COSIS. The COSIS stands for Commission of Small Island States on Climate Change and International Law. Please write this down. There can be a prelims question based on this. Even on ITLOS, there can be a prelims question. That's why I explained all the basic facts. So this group, the Commission of Small Island States, these are the countries which face the biggest threat from rising sea levels. There are many small island nations, right, from Maldives to Fiji. These small island states, they have very limited development, they have very limited resources, and they are at the biggest risk to be affected by extreme weather events and rising sea levels. Many small island states could even be submerged due to rising sea levels in the coming decades. So they face the biggest impact of climate change and global warming. So they have formed this commission to focus on climate change and international law and enforce these provisions which will push other countries, the larger countries which are emitting greenhouse gases, to restrict their emissions so that the small island states can be protected. Because if you look at our environment, there are no boundaries that exist. The borders that we have drawn, they are imaginary borders. So emissions by China, emissions by US, emissions by India will eventually affect the small island countries as well. They will end up paying the price for the large scale emissions of other countries, right? So there is a transboundary impact. Your borders, your boundaries don't matter when it comes to climate change, pollution and global warming. So small island states are demanding the large emitters to abide by international law and focus on tackling climate change and reducing their emissions. But the large emitters, of course, they are looking after their own developmental interests, and as we have seen, there hasn't been much action taken by the countries when it comes to reducing emissions. So that is why this Commission of Small Island States, they approached ITLOS for an advisory ruling, for a legal opinion which can push the countries in the right direction, and it could also set a legal precedent. It could set a legal precedence while deciding climate change related cases. So this is a new breakthrough in the field of international climate litigation. Of late, many Supreme Courts around the world and several judicial bodies are receiving more and more cases related to climate change, global warming, etc. So climate change litigation has become a specialized domain in itself. It will help in holding the polluters, the emitters accountable and push them to initiate climate action. So the Commission of Small Island States approached ITLOS urging for an advisory opinion, right, under UN clause, which can push the UN clause members to focus on reduction of greenhouse gas emissions. And ITLOS has passed a very important ruling. It has given an advisory opinion which states that even the non-COSIS states, even the non-small island states have an obligation under UN clause to focus on climate change, to protect the marine ecosystems and marine environment from anthropogenic damage. The damage caused to our seas and oceans because of human activities. It could be pollution, it could be the emission of greenhouse gases. So dealing with that becomes an obligation on all the countries, even if it's not a member of the Commission of Small Island States, even if it's not a member of the UN clause. Let's say a country has not ratified the UN clause. Even then, any country, any UN member state will have an obligation because their emissions, their act of pollution will have a transboundary impact. It will affect the other countries. And that is why this advisory opinion given by ITLOS is quite significant. Even though it's just an advisory opinion, it has no enforcement powers. This can't be legally enforced. It's not a binding ruling as such. It's not a judicial pronouncement. It's only an advisory opinion. But this can set a new legal precedent. When it comes to deciding climate change related cases, climate change related litigation, this case where ITLOS delivered an advisory opinion, it can set a new precedent. See, for example, there was a case in the Netherlands. In Netherlands, there was a particular case where a NGO was arguing that the climate action efforts of Netherlands government was not sufficient. Under Paris Agreement of the Climate Change Convention, countries have announced their voluntary targets, nationally determined contributions. These are the national efforts that countries are making to bring down their emissions and to contribute to climate action efforts. So under Paris Agreement, the global target is to keep the rise in temperature to under 2 degrees Celsius and if possible to reduce it and keep it under 1.5 degrees Celsius by the end of the century. So to achieve this climate goal, countries are supposed to come out with their voluntary targets called NDCs, nationally determined contributions, and start focusing on implementing them and achieving those targets by reducing emissions, by switching to clean energy, by scaling back deforestation, promoting afforestation, etc. So Netherlands had announced a set of targets as part of its NDCs, as part of its commitment to the Paris Agreement. But this environmental NGO, which didn't agree with the government of Netherlands, it filed a case at the Supreme Court of Netherlands. And in this historic case, the Supreme Court ruled in favor of the NGO, urging the government of Netherlands to revise its NDCs, to provide for greater commitments. Is that clear? For example, let me provide the specific numbers so that it becomes clear. The Netherlands government had pledged to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 17% compared to 1990 levels. This environmental group, which was fighting this case against the government of Netherlands, argued that 17% reduction of emissions is not enough. And the Supreme Court, it ruled against the government of Netherlands and demanded that the government should focus on bringing down emissions by 25%. 17% is not enough. 25% emission reduction has to be achieved as compared to pre-industrial levels. So this ruling was quite historic by the Supreme Court of Netherlands. It relied upon the European Convention on Human Rights. It linked climate change impact with human right violations and urged the government of Netherlands to increase its climate action targets and reduce emissions by 25%. So this in a way set a precedent, a legal precedent with regard to climate change litigation. So this can be invoked by the courts in other countries, by the international courts and judicial bodies while they are dealing with climate related cases. So in that context, ITLOS advisory opinion which has been provided becomes very important. even though it has no immediate impact, it has no enforcement, or it is not binding. Just the statement that every country should tackle anthropogenic emissions because small island states are getting affected by it. Rising sea level is a direct existential threat for them. So ITOLS has ruled that as per UN clause provisions, every country, irrespective of whether they are party to it or not, every UN member state has an obligation to cut down emissions significantly to ensure that rising sea levels can be tackled. Because climate change has a huge detrimental impact. I'm sure you would have heard about marine heat waves, how the seas and the oceans absorb the carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, leading to acidification of oceans. That can lead to coral bleaching. It can disrupt the entire marine food chain. Plus, the excess heat caused by global warming is being absorbed by seas and oceans, triggering marine heat waves, which is extremely harmful for marine life. So this obviously affects the economy of small island countries. It could lead to more disasters, more cyclones, right? It can lead to more floods and droughts, and these small island states will be the most affected. So that is why this advisory opinion is a critical landmark as far as environmental law is concerned. Got it? So that is what we learned from this important article. Now, what kind of question can you anticipate? The recent advisory opinion by ITLOS is a high point in international climate change litigation. Comment. So there are two aspects here in this question. One, you need to know the current affairs, right? Because it's asking about the recent advisory opinion. So if you're not aware of this recent opinion delivered by ITLOS, you can never answer this question. Next is the static part. You should know what is ITLOS, what ITLOS has to do with climate change litigation. If you don't know that static concept, you can never write an answer. So you can begin the answer with an introduction talking about the impact of climate change on rising sea levels, how it can affect the small island states. Always set the tone, set a context. Talk about global warming, increased anthropogenic emissions contributing to rising sea levels, and how it can threaten small island states. Then you can start discussing this particular case where the Commission of Small Island States approached ITLOS under the provisions of UN clause. Because under UN clause provisions, all countries are obligated to tackle pollution and any marine environmental threats. They have a duty to deal with those threats. So these small island countries, they sought an advisory opinion, and ITLOS has given this advisory opinion that every country has to reduce emissions from anthropogenic activities. Because it is having a transboundary impact, it is affecting the small island countries. So then you can conclude the answer by saying that this is a breakthrough. It's a breakthrough with regard to climate change litigation. Maybe you can draw a comparison with the ruling in Netherlands. How the Netherlands Supreme Court delivered a historic judgment forcing the Netherlands government to increase its emission reduction targets. How it invoked European Convention on Human Rights to pass the ruling, and how it linked climate change impact with human right violations. So that sets a new legal precedent in international law. So similarly, this advisory opinion of ITLOS can have a much wider impact. Even though it's not enforceable, even though it's just an advisory opinion, it can set a new legal benchmark as far as climate related cases are concerned. So that is it. Your answer is done. There is a proper structure. All the key points are included, and you're going to get good marks. Next, a quick discussion on this column from page number 9. In this column, the writer is talking about India's aircraft carriers. The article is related to international relations and also security. So it's important for GS2 and also GS3. So focus of this column is about the preparedness of Indian Navy and the requirement of more aircraft carriers to establish the dominant position of the Indian Navy across the Indian Ocean and beyond the Indian Ocean. I hope you know that as of now, India has 2 functional aircraft carriers. One is INS Vikramaditya, which is an old Soviet aircraft carrier that India procured after getting it refurbished in Russia. The other one is an indigenous aircraft carrier built under the Vikrant class, the INS Vikrant. Recently, it was inducted into the Indian Navy. So as of now, we have 2 operational aircraft carriers. Now, aircraft carriers play a critical role in naval strategy because essentially an aircraft carrier is a floating air base. It is a floating air base. It carries multiple fighter jets which are heavily armed with missiles, rockets. Potentially they can carry nuclear armed missiles as well, right? They are equipped with even cruise missiles and various capabilities, including underwater, surface capabilities, and even land attack capabilities. So an aircraft carrier which brings an entire battle group together, it will contain an entire fleet of ships as well. Apart from the primary aircraft carrier, which is the lead ship in a battle group, there will be other ships that back up the entire carrier battle group, along with submarines, aircrafts. So such carrier battle groups or carrier based navies, they are extremely powerful in projecting power. This is the ultimate symbol of power projection, hard power projection. In fact, that is how US became a global dominant power through its gunboat diplomacy. Using these boats that can carry massive troops, arms, weapons, including aircrafts, fighter jets, and pushing them around the world, throughout the seas and the oceans of the world. That is how US gained its hard power influence, through which it could intimidate and subjugate other countries and thus establish its global dominance. So naval superiority does require such capabilities of having multiple deployable aircraft carriers, right, which is a major force multiplier for any navy. If you look at the plans of the Indian Navy has a very ambitious plan to turn into a blue water navy. A blue water navy is when a navy can operate far beyond its boundaries, thousands of kilometers away, if we can deploy and maintain an operational presence in faraway seas and oceans and provide the required support and supplies to those ships and submarines. That is when a navy becomes a true blue water navy, a blue water force. So US, even China for that matter, they are true blue water navies. India is still in the process of becoming a blue water navy. But we are getting there, we are almost getting there. So if you look at the long-term prospective plans of the Indian Navy, it has always planned for 3 operational aircraft carriers. Basically, we will need 2 aircraft carriers on both seaboards, on both sides of India, one on the east coast, one on the west coast, and one would be in service or in repair. And if all 3 are functioning at the same time, 1 aircraft carrier can be dispatched maybe to the south of the Indian Ocean or to other parts of the world, while 2 aircraft carriers will be stationed on the 2 seaboards of India's coastline. So the minimum aircraft requirement for Indian Navy has always been 3 aircraft carriers. Now, problem for India is that Vikramaditya is already a aging aircraft carrier. It will be decommissioned in a few years. INS Vikrant will become the sole operational aircraft carrier then. So that is why there is a plan, a proposal to quickly begin the construction of the second indigenous aircraft carrier under the Vikrant class. Under the Vikrant class, there is an urgency to build the second aircraft carrier. But problem is, aircraft carriers are massive, not just in size, with regard to their cost. You would need anywhere between $4 to $5 billion to execute this project, which is a huge financial expenditure, right? And also, today aircraft carriers are in a way losing their significance in modern day warfare. See, if you look at maritime theatre, the primary focus today is on area denial or access denial. Access denial or area denial operations. Basically, you deny access to critical seas and shipping lanes by using largely submarine fleets. That is what China does. China relies on its massive submarine fleet to deny access to the ships of other countries, to the vessels of other countries, because these are threats which are lurking under the water. You never know when a submarine can prop up and carry out a covert strike. Submarines are much harder to detect compared to surface vessels. That way, aircraft carriers are actually very vulnerable. They can be easily spotted, they can be easily taken out with an airstrike or with a targeted missile strike. They do have air defense capabilities, but it's much easier to target an aircraft carrier as compared to a submarine. So countries like China have built up tremendous area denial capabilities. Chinese submarines, for example, can possibly block Indian Navy's access to Malacca Strait. Right? If Chinese submarines if they are preying around the Malacca Strait, it would become impossible in a warlike situation for Indian Navy to even deploy into Malacca Strait. You never know when the submarine is going to surface and strike. So detecting submarines is difficult, and some countries like China have built up these capabilities, which poses a significant threat across Indian Ocean, across the Pacific region as well. Of course, US also has similar capabilities. India has been in the process, but we have been lagging behind. As per the prospective plans of the Navy, we were supposed to have 24 submarines by now. But any idea how many submarines we have? We have only 16. That too, many of them are old Russian and German submarines which are outdated. Recently, we have built a few submarines under the Scorpion class, which we have procured from France. Around 6 Calvary class submarines were built based on the Scorpion submarines of France, and they have been inducted into the Indian Navy. But these are diesel electric submarines which are very vulnerable. They have to come to the surface very frequently to recharge their batteries, to take in oxygen. So that makes them vulnerable for detection. We do have nuclear powered submarines under Arihant class. INS Arihant is our first nuclear powered submarine, and few more nuclear powered submarines are getting built. But however, the numbers are still very small. We have only 16 operational submarines, many of which are outdated. The plan was to have 24 at least. Now compare this with China's submarine fleet. China is miles ahead of India. Look at China's surface vessel fleet. It has a massive number compared to the Indian Navy. China is already focusing on its 4th aircraft carrier, which we have discussed recently in our sessions as well. India is still contemplating whether should we build a 2nd aircraft carrier. Right? A 3rd aircraft carrier. I said 2nd because anyways Vikramaditya will be decommissioned maximum in another 8 or 10 years. So by 2030s, mid-2030s, we'll have only 1 carrier, which is INS Vikrant. And we are still contemplating whether should we build the 2nd one, the 2nd indigenous aircraft carrier. Of course, the cost aspect should also be considered, plus the vulnerability of aircraft carriers also has to be considered. So that is the dilemma that India is dealing with, and that's what the writer is presenting. But he goes on to provide a solid explanation as to why India needs another aircraft carrier. The writer strongly believes that India needs 3 operational aircraft carriers. So it's not just the 2nd indigenous carrier under Vikrant class. We would need a 3rd one to replace INS Vikramaditya. And time is of critical importance because Cochin Shipyard Limited, which is executing the indigenous aircraft carrier program, it has gained all the skills and the capabilities by building the first aircraft carrier under the Vikrant class. Recently, it has built INS Vikrant, which was inducted. If we delay for 5-10 years, then Cochin Shipyard might lose the skills and the capabilities. That's what happened with Mazgaon Dock Limited, MDL, which built the Scorpion fleet. Right? Initially, Mazgaon Dock had built up a lot of capabilities by building few German submarines for India. Right? German submarines were provided, technology was transferred, and MDL had built those submarines. But for 10-15 years, there was indecisiveness on the part of the government. We did not launch the next program, and MDL lost those skills and capabilities over a period of time. Then we had to procure the Scorpion technology from France and then build the Calvary class of submarines. So that is a lesson for India. Since Cochin Shipyard has recently built INS Vikrant, we should make use of those skills and capabilities, the resources, and quickly build a 2nd aircraft carrier and then go for a 3rd, which can replace INS Vikramaditya. So that is the argument of the writer, but please note, aircraft carrier is not a solution to all your maritime problems. Aircraft carriers have many drawbacks. As I said, they are very vulnerable. They can be easily taken out. Submarines provide a unique advantage because they are underwater. They are lurking underwater. It's very hard to detect a submarine, especially nuclear powered submarine. So in that regard, China will always maintain that superiority because of its massive submarine fleet, many of which are nuclear powered. So China has these great area denial capabilities or access denial capabilities, which will remain a threat for India. That is why India is scaling up its anti-submarine warfare capabilities. We have procured the P-8 type Poseidon, which is called a submarine hunter, right? We have procured the Seahawk Romeo MH-60 helicopters from the US, which is also known for its anti-submarine warfare. So while we build our anti-submarine warfare capabilities, we have to expand our own submarine fleet while having 3 operational aircraft carriers. That is the requirement for Indian Navy. All right. So please be aware of this. There could be a possible question in GS2 or maybe even in GS3. Now, let's take a quick look at the prelim section. We have 3 small articles. Let's go through them one by one. On page 13, there is a government scheme which is mentioned, PM Kisan Nidhi scheme. Following the inauguration of the new government, the 3rd term of the Modi government, immediately the government has ordered the release of the next installment of funds under PM Kisan Nidhi, which is a very important government scheme which is focused on providing financial support to farmers. So let's understand what is PM Kisan Nidhi or Kisan Samman Nidhi. It is a central sector scheme, which means it is 100% funded by the government of India. The entire funding comes from the central government, and this scheme, which was launched in 2018, its main focus is to provide financial support. 6,000 rupees per year for farmer families is transferred in 3 equal installments. So basically 2,000 rupees in each installment is paid over a period of 1 year to help the farmers procure the required inputs, agricultural inputs. It could be fertilizers, it could be the seeds, right? Whatever inputs are needed to ensure adequate agricultural productivity and yield, the support is given by the government through a direct financial transfer. So through the DBT, the direct benefit transfer, the money is deposited in the bank accounts of these farmer families. All right. So that is the purpose of the scheme. The money is directly transferred. It's a cash transfer scheme essentially, and farmers can make use of the 6,000 rupees, which is given in 3 installments, to purchase the required inputs for protecting their crops. So that is the purpose of PM Kisan Samman Nidhi, and the next tranche, the next installment, it has been released by the government immediately after being sworn in. So it's one of the first decisions taken by the new government which was installed the other day. Next, on page 16, we have this article related to Aditya L1. Aditya L1 is a very ambitious space mission of ISRO to study the solar phenomena and the sun's atmosphere. Right? We have recently launched this mission called Aditya L1 to study the sun. And according to the article, Aditya L1 has successfully observed the recent solar activity, the intense solar activity that occurred a few days ago. Many of you might remember, we studied this in our class as well. There were aurora borealis phenomena around the world because of the intense geomagnetic storm that struck the Earth's atmosphere. This was quite unprecedented. It was triggered by massive solar flares and caused by coronal mass ejection. The solar atmosphere goes through this cyclical weather season, right, where there is a massive emission from the corona of the sun towards the outer layer of the atmosphere, and charged particles and radiation-based particles are thrown out into the space that travels as solar flares, as solar storms, and they strike the Earth's atmosphere. So they are very dangerous as well. They can disrupt communication, destroy all our satellites. They can disrupt power transmission on the Earth. So they are very dangerous for modern technology. And right now we are entering a very deadly phase with regard to the solar activity, where over the next few decades, the sun is going to get even more intense. We will witness more such coronal mass ejections and more intense solar flares, which can affect space weather. So monitoring and studying the solar atmosphere, the coronal mass ejection, understanding the sunspots, right, and the impact of space weather on our space assets, on human life, is very crucial, very critical. That is where Aditya L1 mission comes into picture. By using the instrument on board, it has remote sensing payloads on board. It has collected vital data L1 is a reference to a specific point called the Lagrange points. Lagrange point in space is such a unique point where the gravitational force between two celestial bodies cancel out. So basically, if you place an object exactly at the Lagrange point, it will remain stationary. It's not going to move around because the two celestial bodies will be exerting an equal and opposite force at that location, thus cancelling out each other. Now, this is great for stationing spacecrafts for observation because it will reduce fuel consumption. You don't have to keep firing thrusters to maneuver it, and that is why Lagrange points are very critical in space exploration. So between the Earth and the Sun, there are few such Lagrange points, and Aditya has been stationed at Lagrange point L1. That is why it's called Aditya L1. Now, let me give you a small assignment. Can you find out how many Lagrange points are present between the Earth and the Sun? Please find it out and mention that in the comments. Now, we take up the last article from page 16. There is a small development with regard to the BRICS grouping. BRICS, which included Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. It has been seen as a very important grouping that in a way has taken a position against the Western countries as far as the international financial architecture is concerned. The BRICS countries have pushed for reforms of World Bank and IMF, and they have countered the World Bank and IMF by setting up their own financial institutions. BRICS has set up the New Development Bank, or NDB, as a counter to the World Bank. It has even set up the Contingent Reserve Arrangement as a counter to the IMF. Because both World Bank and IMF have been dominated by Western countries, US and European countries. So that is how BRICS was born, primarily as a counter to the Western countries and Western dominated financial institutions, pushing for reforms of the global financial architecture. But last year, there was a very significant development with regard to BRICS. The grouping has been expanded with the inclusion of new member countries. 6 countries were admitted last year, but 5 of them have joined the BRICS grouping. So which are these countries? Egypt and Ethiopia from Africa, Iran, UAE and Saudi Arabia from West Asia, and also Argentina from South America. These were the 6 new members who were admitted to the BRICS group. Argentina from South Africa, Egypt, Ethiopia from Africa, and you have West Asian countries like Iran, UAE and Saudi Arabia. These 6 countries were given membership. But however, Argentina has chosen not to join at the last minute. Due to the change in government, the new Argentinian president believes that BRICS doesn't serve the purpose for Argentina, and he has shown an inclination towards the US. So Argentina has not joined the group, but the other 5 countries, Egypt, Iran, UAE, Saudi Arabia and Ethiopia, they have joined the BRICS grouping, and India has welcomed these countries during one of the first meetings that took place under the BRICS. This is not the BRICS summit. There was a related ministerial meeting where for the first time all the 10 countries were present, and India has welcomed these new member countries, and it highlights the significant role of this organization. On this note, I would like to bring today's discussion to an end. I hope you guys have liked the session, understood all the key topics, and again, apologies for the interruption in between due to the technical difficulties. So if you like the session, do let me know through your comments, press the like button, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. That is it. I'll see you tomorrow, 10 a.m. Thanks for watching. Have a good day.